So hello everyone to the webinar How the World Reacted to the COVID-19. My name is Małgorzata Kujawska. I am an associate professor at Poznań University of Medical Sciences in Poland. I am also an R&D expert in healthcare and biomedical technologies. So welcome to the webinar, how the world reacted to the COVID-19 crisis. So let's start from the beginning. So more than 1 year ago, the World Health Organization learned of the first new cases of pneumonia cases in Wuhan of unknown origin. And soon after, the coronavirus infection spreading triggers the pandemic, which still currently is present. So today we will discuss how the world respond to this crisis. Especially I would like to deal with the medical, social, economical, political challenges, as well as what was the impact and still is the impact of the crisis to the education system, as well as the progress in technology progress. So regarding the response and reaction of world, in my opinion, the most significant challenges had to be faced by the medical world to remove just the primary reason, I mean the virus. Regarding medicine, we have to discuss separately, evaluate also separately two issues. I mean the research and science, and also healthcare system. I am scientist, and in my opinion, I was monitor all the progress in science and research regarding the coronavirus and COVID. And in my opinion, this part of the medical world responded perfectly. No industry has been developing so fast, so quickly as the drug and vaccine makers. Also, medical equipment or devices has been appeared very quickly, and they were tailored and made especially for the purpose to care patients with suffer for COVID-19. And it was possible since the fast path or fast track of implementing discoveries, medical discoveries, has been used to win against the virus. Because in the past, for example, discoveries in drugs or vaccine lasted many years, but here during the pandemic era, we can see that the vaccination just was made and developed and also introduced to the market within 1 year. So it's extremely fast and effectively. I can also assess this process as extremely fast and effective. So regarding the healthcare system, we can observe that medicine has transformed to the telemedicine. The purpose of this transformation at the beginning, the primary reason was to limit the contacts between patients and also contact between doctors and physicians and patients. In addition, healthcare technology is being developed into the personalized virtual care. It is possible due to application of the artificial intelligence and also data analytics. So we can observe that during the pandemic era, there is completely different approach as we can observe in the past. In the past, the approach to the pandemic was was focused how to treat the virus infection. But in the future, and now we can observe that the personalized medicine based on the tools using AI and data analytics. This is focused and addressed to the to managing health, especially in the context, for example, to maximize health treating process, especially in the context of patients suffer from other chronic disease. And also what is important in my opinion is also important that the technology allow to predict and alert future what is highly possible future outbreaks. So in my opinion, this is the two main direction of the discoveries and progress in medicine during the pandemic era. Apart from the biological aspect of the pandemic, we have to also notice the obvious, in my opinion, the link between the globalization and the pandemics. Therefore, some authors, some researchers call the pandemic 19 as a crowd disease or civilization disease. So, since why it is called crowded or civilization disease? Because the virus requires abundant population, so the globalization of production and market makes a world a global value chain that of course implies, promotes mobility of products and people that as a result contributes to the virus spreading. So in my opinion, we cannot compare solution used in the past, for example, during the Spanish flu or during the Black Death or other past outbreaks. So let's discuss also other aspects regarding the globalization and technology. Today, our guests are outstanding experts in the disciplines which I previously mentioned. So please welcome Professor Istemi Demirach, sorry for the pronounce, who is Professor of Accounting at TalTech in Estonia, and his current research focus is focused on accountability and governance of COVID-19 pandemic. So, Professor Demirach, you are experienced in the governance of COVID-19 pandemic. So, what is your opinion regarding globalization? Do you think that the globalization is the only the contributing to the development of pandemic circumstances, or maybe we can also, or maybe you can also see globalization as the factor which can help overcome the world to overcome the crisis 19. So please share with us your opinion, your experience. Can you unmute, Professor?
Can you hear me now? Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm very pleased to be able to make a contribution to this debate. The question really is what the world has done in terms of this terrible pandemic, which has caused almost over 2 million death tolls and almost over 100 million infected people worldwide. So it's a major event, episode, pandemic, whatever you call it. It affects friends, colleagues, and us as academics. And the answer, short answer, is like, of course, some countries have done better than others. If I sort of look at some numbers that I have collected, Japan, for instance, with 126 million population, just over 5,000 deaths. Whereas when we look at a country like Mexico, with the same population, it's got 150,000 deaths. So you can see the difference between 5,000 and 150,000 given the same population. So why is that then, do you think, some countries have done better than others? It's something that I would like to discuss. And of course, there are technical issues, also cultural issues. Let me just start with the technical issues. Testing is really major importance in the pandemic, in the management of the pandemic. And a recent work that I've done with my colleagues, Salman Ahmed and Kieran Connolly, Salman from Aston University and Kieran from Belfast, Queen's. We looked at how UK government, for instance, have handled testing and, you know, what extent testing was used at the early stages and the later stages. And you find that there has been different roles by governments in terms of using testing. Initially, testing was used for classification purposes, whereas later testing was used for a device to strategize their operations towards the pandemic governance. So, and you could see that also how governments have treated in the United States with Trump, saying that he wasn't scared of it, and Boris Johnson saying that, you know, I went to the hospital and shook everyone's hands. And then how things have changed with the testing becoming more established. So the technical aspects is really important, but I want to, if you allow me, to look at some cultural issues. And I think what we find is that if we look at countries with historical drastic threats and disasters and famines, they seem to have developed stricter rules in dealing with the pandemic. And a recent published work covering 50 countries by Lancet Planetary Health has found that loose cultures had 5 times more cases and more than 8 times deaths. You know, obviously, you know, which countries would define as loose and strict, we can talk about it. But if you can categorize countries as being loose and strict, you know, the strict countries or tight countries had far less fear of the pandemic. So when you're looking at countries which we call loose, the people didn't really take it very seriously. They you know, things like, well, we'll be okay, you know, we can handle it, and as opposed to countries with tight control. And the results were that you had 70% more sick people, and only 49 in the loose countries. In terms of the US, for instance, I'm sure Anzi will also confirm, having lived there. You know, country with innovation and credibility in terms of dealing with technical aspects and medical aspects of the pandemic. It was a major liability in the pandemic. It wasn't a sort of a leading country in dealing with it. people were not interested in wearing masks, and they were fearing of the lockdowns and so on. And as I said, the Trumps on the 10th of March 2020, typical saying like, stay calm, it will go away. Boris Johnson's same sort of thing. So what really needs to be done, and what are the sort of this governance thing? I think one of the things is that we need to realize that we can handle this pandemic. We don't need to be scared of it, and also I think sort of ambidextrity is important in terms of being able to react situations where it is required, but also being able to take things lightly and enjoy life, and I think adjustments of locations much more effective than just having a standard kind of management of this pandemic. So I think some countries at the early stages were just so scared, it was all locked down, everywhere, whereas some parts of the country, they didn't really have much of the disease, virus, whatever you call it. So I think by collecting data and getting better at management of the governance of the pandemic, we're now seeing that the centralization has moved to localization, and the local management of it seems to be much more effective in managing the three important issues: the economy, the health, and the democratic rights and liberalism, the freedom of people's desires to not to be put down under lockdown. So I think that things are changing, moving in terms of how you treat these things. On the ambidextrity, for instance, when we look at New Zealand, they had a very strict lockdown, and they had people like Kiwis in New Zealand. They were really used to have their freedom and liberty, but they were so obedient when they see this pandemic coming in. And hence, New Zealand was one of the most successful countries that came out of managing the pandemic. So the third point, I think we've got to realize that we're all in this together. Countries that dealt with, populism and nationalism and so on, America first, and we'll just make sure that we are okay. It just doesn't work, that kind of populistic view. We need to realize that this is a global pandemic, and we need to look at this really strong, powerful leaders and their power in terms of governance, and you find that there is a disconnect. People are not necessarily following the strong leaders, and because they seem to lack power in managing the general population. So the kind of the Trump era of being kind of very strong leader, but not necessarily being recognized as such by the power of people. We need to have to deal with this. We need to have peace in the world. We need to have the gender equality. All of these kind of things that the what I would say United Nations should be dealing with. And one other thing on this, I think the World Health Organization, and that didn't seem to be very effective in coordinating the global pandemic, and which we would really expect some sort of United Nations organizations taking in charge of the governance of the pandemic, and now more so with the vaccination, of course. there are sort of ways of dealing with it, like passport users and that kind of things, to enable movement while the pandemic is on. But there are lots of issues in terms of human rights and individual rights and so on, and marginalization and race issues, with all these kind of things that we need to be very careful how we manage the future pandemic globally. So I think that's the sort of thing that I want to talk about, but I'm sure I can come back and pick up some of those points after.
Thank you, Professor Demirak, for your impressive talk.
Anzi.
The other topic which I also want to deal within this webinar is education system and challenges associated with pandemic crisis in the teaching process. For this purpose, I invited Professor Antonio, who is a teacher of physics and chemistry, and also implement the CAFE project in East Timor, but he can't join us today because we are also involved in the education system, maybe not as Professor Antonio, who teach students at high school, but we as academician teacher, we also had to face the problems associated with remote teaching. So can you share your experience? What do you think? How the crisis impact the education system? Do you think that is the remote system, the new techniques which we have to implement during for the purpose of teaching are so they are so effective as the standard regular teaching? Or yeah, what is your opinion? Maybe now I will ask Professor Ruciński. Professor,
I can maybe just continue with, because
okay.
To,
yes, sorry.
No, it's just related to cultures again, because I think only yesterday I was watching that survey was done all over the world, and you find how different students in different countries have reacted to the to be taught by distance learning, online learning. And while some countries like Germany and I think the UK were not so happy, in Europe Italians were very happy with this. I mean, we obviously don't know the reasons, but there must be some sort of cultural way of looking at the technology and what you see the benefits of this. And there are issues about the cost of reduction in education by online, and the argument was, like, you can offer alternatives and paying a bit more, if you like, in future. I'm kind of looking forward and say in future that you may have the choice to go to the university and learn face to face, but you may also be in future offered online. And this could be quite interesting, given our other Antonio colleague was talking about, in terms of developing countries, where you could now provide education globally in areas where this may not have been thought of possible. And similar things has taken place in medicine and treatment and so on. So there has been some advantages in terms of the, I'm sure Anzu will talk about the technological developments and how this could really help dealing with some of the global problems of poverty, inequality, diversity, inclusiveness, and race. So there has been some advantages that I think we can learn from the experience in dealing with the pandemic. So clearly, you know, access to equipment, you know, it's not the same. Countries are claiming that, you know, some countries in Europe, that the problems have been resolved by government providing computers, but you know, what extent are they learning while online? So there's a lot of questions, a lot more data needs to be collected. In my opinion, it will never be, university education will never be 100% online, because it defeats its purpose of, you know, learning social and cultural exchange between students, and you know, the interaction and development, the intellectual talks face to face, and then what the students learn from that. So, you know, we'll just have to wait and see and collect a lot more data really to find out what the impact of online education has been in developed countries. But I know that the things will be much worse in poor countries in the globe, where they have very little facilities of online teaching and technology. So,
Thank you. So Andrzej Ruciński is a professor in the engineering department at the University of New Hampshire. He's a visionary and system architect, global AI expert, and member of the Central European Healthcare Expo 2020 Program Council. So Professor Ruciński, based on your really impressive experience in innovation technology and also education, can you share with us what is your opinion about changes in education and effectiveness of education online, and how new technological tools are helpful and useful for the education process, and maybe not only to the at the primary school or high school, but especially in the context of university needs. I mean that, for example, I work and organize lab classes. So how can you see that there are actually present, and there is actual access to the virtual tools which can help to which can manage the need associated with the organizing clinical or lab classes with students?
Professor Kujawska, thank you very much for this opportunity and for the introduction. I would like to emphasize that Professor Demirak raised a lot of excellent questions, which I hope we had time and sufficient opportunity to discuss them in detail. One of the things what Professor Demirak said was to point the fact that we have some best practices, how the world and how different countries reacted to this COVID. So these are very good comments, and they should be explored. If not during this webinar, then later on maybe we will have some opportunities to explore them in depth. So what I would like to propose is, since my time is limited, I would like to divide my comments into three categories. I would like to talk a little bit about COVID-19 as the first sort of prototype global pandemic. Okay, so we have a new phenomenon in the history of our civilization. So this is a new experience. I would like to speak up a little bit on that behalf. Then the second thing what I would like to do is to emphasize the role of technology, because this is something which we have at our disposal, and as a tool, as a domain, as something which we can harvest and use. This is quite well understood, and this is at our disposal. So what we can do to change our current situation. So that's what I'm going to focus on. obviously in a very concise and in considering that we have very limited time, which is difficult for professors, by the way. And the last topic, I would like to make some comments about education, since we are missing Antonio, unfortunately, because he's in the middle of it during the pandemic. I would like to share some of the experiences and some of the thoughts regarding education. And I would say right away that education, this is something which is a grand challenge for all of us. As much as technology is something which we have at our disposal, in my opinion, education is not well understood as a medium to change the mindset of the whole planet, okay? Because we have to change the way how people see the world, and we have to use education as a primary peaceful tool, medium, as I said, to change this perception. So this is what my plans are. And if I'm going to talk too long, Professor Kujawska, please stop me, and I'm not going, I will understand that our time is limited. So the first topic is this prototype which we are facing with, and the role why we are here. Well, we are here because we are concerned citizens, and we are here because we are scientists, and we feel obliged to use our experience and our knowledge to help everybody on a global scale. So we also have a license to speak up today. There's a recent research done by the Edelman Institute talking about the importance of trust in the world. And among different data, it turns out that academia and scientists, these are entities which have the highest trust recognized by the whole population of the world. So we are not only concerned, we not only qualified to share our experience, but also we have an obligation to speak up what's going on with the pandemic. It's interesting because, in my opinion, considering all the deficiencies we are facing, we are winning the war on pandemic, not losing the war on pandemic. So the question obviously is if the pace and the speed how we were winning this war is satisfying. Well, you know, that's a debatable type of thing, and obviously we can probably do something better, but also please have mercy on us. This is the first time we are experiencing this type of pandemic. It's global. It means that there is no way to go. Whenever we go, any country we choose, we are going to face the same problems, the same issues, health issues, and so on. It's really global. It affects everybody. So if we treat this pandemic as a disease, I would say that from the diagnostic standpoint, and please forgive me my statements because I'm not a medical doctor, so I have to be careful making any medical or medicine-related statements. But from the diagnostic standpoint, I think the diagnosis is pretty much understood and well taken care of. But if we are looking from a historical perspective, I would say that the prevention part, it was a big failure. You know, I personally know about some attempts to warn the world coming from places like Mayo Clinic and the Cambridge Innovation Center from Cambridge, Massachusetts. There were voices, but they were not strong enough. They were not taken seriously. And unfortunately, we were sort of taken by surprise what happened with COVID-19. But we are winning this war. Why we are winning this war? Well, there are many factors. One of them is progress in medical sciences. And Professor Kujawska has elaborated on this subject just a couple of minutes ago. We are winning this war because of space exploration. So it shows the stamina and the energy which is in our civilization, and the successes are astonishing. It's just unbelievable what times we are living in. And finally, we are winning this war because of the progress in technology. Well, my presentation is mixed with general observations and statements, but also with personal experience. So I know that if we measure the progress of technology by the size of a transistor, in 1986, the dominant technology in microelectronics was called 5 micron. This was the size of a single transistor, the gate size, to be precise. And today, in 2021, we are dealing with a technology which is equal to uses the microelectronics technology with the size of a single transistor gate equal to 5 nanometers. So this is in one generation increase 1,000 times. In one generation, 1,000 times. If you look at the overall structure of a transistor, since this is a three-dimensional structure, we can say that the size of a transistor in one generation decreased 1,000,000 times. In one generation, 1,000,000 times. With the results which allow us to use global communication, phones, 5G, 6Gs, 7Gs, whatever Gs we will develop. And this is something which is at our disposal. This is available. There's ample supply of those technologies. Everybody is using those technologies for this in all possible directions of our life, including this webinar. So this is sort of something which is extremely positive. But we also have some negative side effects of technology. Well, the technology could not prevent us from phenomena which is the lack of global trust, security and safety. There is a lot of fake news and uncertain data, false data, and the last but not least, the overall issue of cybersecurity is a big failure right now. So we have a homework to do. So what can be done? Well, it turns out that Homo sapiens has been sort of divided into different subspecies. For example, Dr. Zaksberg from Denmark has developed the concept of Homo digitalis. Okay, this is an example of a human who is addicted to IT technology. Okay, so we are all addicted. I am addicted. Okay, so this is something which we accepted the dominance of technology, and you know, different people react to this technology in different ways, and this is something which I have to take seriously as a negative effect of the existing technology. Dr. Topol developed the concept of Homo digitus, not Homo digitalis, but Homo digitus. And this is a positive picture of humans in which we are taking advantage of the technology, especially from the standpoint of telemedicine and e-health. When we are not really talking about health issues, but we are talking about longevity issues. So this is something which we can sort of cherish, nourish, look into, investigate, and try to sort of save the planet using those paradigms. And finally, let me just say a couple of words about education. And as I said, these are sort of local aspect and a global aspect. As I said before, if I'm talking too much, Professor Kujawska, please stop me at any moment. Well, distant learning obviously is sort of a dominant technology in learning right now. Again, my personal experience is several decades old. I started with an experimentation with the Budapest University of Technology in the 80s, and it was before WWW. So we have to develop the whole system for distant learning. And because I wanted to prevent cheating, the topic of the discussion over the internet at the time was ISO 9000. And I published this effort in different journals and different configurations, and I gave seminars. And I never forget a seminar when a lady from the audience asked me if you need a professor to conduct this distant learning lecture. And I said no. And the second question was, do you need students to listen to you when you are delivering this distant learning lecture? Well, I said no, okay. So we are dealing with those anecdotal scenarios, but we have to take them very seriously, because if you think about delivering lectures over the internet and you are teaching, for example, mathematics, well, then there is a question, how many professors do you need to teach mathematics in the world? Well, you need at least one. But do we need two professors? Well, maybe, because the first one may be sick, so you need to replace the sick one with the one who is still functioning. But that's anecdotal. But then there is always also a question, how many teachers do we need if we teach this distant learning thing? There are good practices, best practices. I live in the state of New Hampshire. So for example, there is the Southern New Hampshire University, which has been conducted distant learning for centuries, I may say. And this is the only way how they teach students. So they have developed the whole system of curricula, and they have a lot of practices. There is also a high school in Exeter, New Hampshire called BLAST, and they have 50,000 students, and all high school students, and they are all learning through distant learning. Whether this is effective, especially right now when we have the explosion of distant learning, well, that's a good question. And I have some doubts if this is working effectively. And as I said, we have to address this on a local scale, using best practices. I remember I was teaching from Singapore to America, from New Hampshire to India. I have developed programs for Ethiopia, India again, and Kazakhstan, and so on. And those best practices should be utilized. But we have a more challenging task ahead of us. We have to educate the whole planet. And this is the task for you, Professor Demirak, and for you, Professor Kujawska. So you are going to be busy. So thank you very much for your attention.
If I may just come in, do I have a minute or two to just pick up one or 2 points?
Yeah. So
can I have?
yeah, please. Yeah, of course.
Yes. I mean, I quite agree with your observation about the role of technology and what it's really achieved. I think both of you made that point, but in my view, technology on its own is not sufficient. We live in society with people with different expectations, and we need governance of this technology. And the evidence of just pure technology not really working was demonstrated in vaccinations and the worldwide kind of diversity of distribution of vaccinations on a global scale. And that really, the governance requires some sort of accountability. And without accountability of those people who are in charge of the technology, and not really responding to people's expectations, but looking at their own self-interest, will not enable technology to be very effective. And that requires transparency. But the issues are not just so simple. In other words, if you have more accountability, doesn't necessarily mean everything will be sorted out, because often when things doesn't work we often complain that there is not enough accountability or transparency. But the more of this thing, transparency doesn't necessarily create more trust. If we disclose more information, doesn't mean people will start trusting each other. So I think there's a lot of work needs to be done in terms of understanding the impact of digitalization and technology, and how this can actually help. In the case of pandemic, looking at who's accountable and how we're going to disclose the information to people that we're so much concerned with, and will that create trust, not just only within your own country, but trust that we need in the global sense. Because without the global trusting each other, we're going to be having a tough time dealing with crises like pandemic and so on. And the things will be much worse in the future if we're not careful about taking into account the importance of people versus technology in the future. I think that's the sort of anecdotal kind of observation I'd like to make, but it's a very important point, I think, in my view.
Thank you, Professor Demirak and Professor Ruciński, for sharing your valuable opinion and your experience in area which you are outstanding experts. So let's summarize our discussion. So I have exactly two questions. So first, my question to you is, do you think that the world is able to overcome the COVID-19, this current crisis soon? So this is my first question. And the second one is more related to the future prediction and outlook. So do you think that the technology and other aspects which we will during the last 1 hour, do you think that we are ready to deal with other potential pandemics in the future? Because there are many opinions and also reports suggesting that it is possible that not only the COVID-19 is not the only one pandemic, but we can also expect other outbreaks in the future. And do you think, is there any gap that should be managed in the respect to this, to the managing and protection, prevention against the future outbreaks? And what potentially UN can play a role, United Nations can plays a role regarding the prevention or managing future crises associated with outbreaks or some other pandemics. So please, I don't recommend the order, so please feel free to share with your opinion. And
I have sort of really my last sort of analysis of how I see things really responds to some of those very big questions. I think it's the people that we need to understand, and how people react and behave, and what their expectations are, and how we manage expectations on a global basis. So it is about, very similar to situations like climate change. I have to say, climate change is going to be much worse than what we experienced in the pandemic. And how successful have we been in dealing with climate change? Trump, didn't sign it. Decided to not to follow the rules and the agreements. And then we have now new president, and see what happens in terms of the commitments of these big countries. So I think the big countries, the main major countries have a lot more responsibility taking this on board. Sustainability issue, and pandemic is part of it. How they deal with sustainability. United Nations may have to look at the 17 SDGs and maybe put more in terms of the pandemic or other crises and really make sure that these are experienced and taken seriously by major private companies, governments. So the challenge ahead is much, I'm afraid, is quite demanding, and I really don't see a quick fix situation with the pandemic and other crises that's facing us in the near future. And I'm not really that optimistic by looking at the last 10 years where we are and all these promises of 2036 with carbon-free emissions and the plans for that. But that's my personal view. I think we need to get companies incentivized, look at their accountability and their role in society, and we need to encourage them that they're not just there to make profit, but contribute to society, because without society they cannot make profits. I think there's a major kind of dialogue needs to be developed by the United Nations, looking things from people's perspective and doing things for people, not just organizations or governments. I think that's the important, challenging thing that's facing the United Nations. I'm concerned.
Thank you. And Professor Ruciński, what is your comments and conclusions?
Well, one of the things we are facing right now, when we are talking right now, today, at this moment, is we can take advantage of something which is called a scientific debate. So I'm taking advantage of it in several aspects. First of all, I strongly disagree with Professor Demirak in terms of being pessimistic or optimistic. I'm very optimistic. I think that we, all of us, we do not only have to address grand challenges and all the challenges we are facing today on a global scale, but this is our obligation. As I said before, we have a license to speak up and make sure that our voice is being heard. So I'm very optimistic, and I will make any effort possible to try to contribute in any possible way to address those issues. I think the key issue is to follow the strategy, because I'm an engineer, to follow the strategy of so-called human-centric technology. Because in this aspect, I agree with Professor Demirak that technology itself is a bad thing. But if we add this human touch and treat technology, AI in particular, with this human touch and focus on the role of humans, then it's going to be better for everybody. So I also would like to see our effort today not being wasted. And this is my call for Professor Kujawska to make any effort possible that through the Organization of United Nations, this webinar, and I think that there are many more similar to this, should be somewhat correlated, integrated, because the times which we are facing are very challenging, and we are qualified and obliged, in my opinion, to try to change the world and be ready for the next epidemic, because this is just the first one, and we can expect that there will be many more to come. So saying that, I would like to thank you once again for the opportunity of speaking up with you as co-speakers, and I would like to thank Professor Kujawska for trust and you know an opportunity for me to be here today. Thank you.
Once again, thank you for accepting my invitation and your really impressive talk and contribution to the discussion. So once again, thank you, and I hope that we can continue our discussion, but maybe also we can develop some cooperation in this topic. So thank you, and let's continue this our cooperation in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Also enjoy. Thank you.